Welcome back to our discussion of the early Middle Ages in Western Europe, guys. So, I just really have one more big thing that I need to talk to you about, and that is the structure of the church and its importance in the early Middle Ages in Western Europe. But I do want, first of all, to make sure that we kind of have an understanding when we talk about the Holy Roman Empire of what we're talking about. So, when Charlemagne inherited the throne for the Frankish kingdom, he inherited everything that you see in yellow. All of this territory he inherited. However, when he died, he controlled a lot more. He controlled territory up here into what is today Germany, down over here into sort of the it's Austria and Hungary are down that direction, and then territory here into the northern portion of Italy. All of that became the Holy Roman Empire. This was the territory that he controlled. And so what occurs is that when he dies, unfortunately, Charlemagne has a son by the name of Pepin, not Pippin. Pippin's the musical. My apologies. He has a son called Pepin, Pepin the Short, which is hilarious. And Pepin the Short managed to hold together the Holy Roman Empire for like a hot minute and a half. But when he died, Pepin had three sons, and he divided the territory up. And his territory was divided between his three sons. Over here, the Germanic portion of like what is today Germany, the Germanic portion of the Holy Roman Empire was divided under his son Louis. You have this area right here, kind of the central portion down into Italy, that was made the kingdom of his son Lothair. And over here in the Frankish kingdom in France, you had this territory go to his son Charles, who his nickname was Charles the Bald, which is pretty funny. So the Holy Roman Empire kind of gets split up very, very quickly. It's more of like an honorary title than an actual political entity. So again, Holy Roman Empire, not particularly holy, not very Roman, and definitely not an empire for long. But one thing that does persist during the early Middle Ages is the Catholic Church. So by about 1000 CE, excuse me, I'm going to adjust my mic here. By about 1000 CE, all of Western Europe had adopted Roman Catholicism. Some areas adopted Catholicism way later than others did. One of the last places to adopt Catholicism were some of the small islands off of the coast of the United Kingdom today. Remember, we have a couple of different branches of Christianity we're dealing with now. We have the Eastern Orthodox Church, which was centered around Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, spreading up into the Russian regions. And then you have the Catholic Church centered around Rome, spreading through Western Europe. Now, what we see is everybody converts in Western Europe, partially because they're forced to, but they convert to Roman Catholicism partially because the church provides stability in a way that no other political entity does. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is peaceful within this Western European region. Because what occurs is that after Charlemagne, there are increasing numbers of disputes between the Pope in Rome, who is the head of Catholicism, and the traditional Holy Roman emperors, those who inherit the title of the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire. The question becomes, who has real power? Who has the power to make laws? Who has the power to declare something sinful or to develop taxes? Like, who has the real authority? Is it the church or is it the state? So this debate over who held ultimate power really played out with the notion of appointing bishops. In the Catholic Church structure, which we'll go over in just a moment, the way it works is that you have a hierarchy. At the top of the Catholic Church, you have the individual known as the Pope. He is understood to be kind of God's emissary on earth. And so he is very, very high status. And then in every country, usually there's at least one archbishop, and that archbishop is in charge of all Catholics in that country. So when we're talking about something that happened in the 11th century, like archbishops were really, really powerful. And just under archbishops were bishops, and bishops were in charge of all Catholics in a given region within a country, and they were also very, very powerful. So, to give you an example, Atlanta is a bishopric, meaning that there's a bishop in Atlanta, and that he kind of calls the shots for all Catholic churches in this region. So, that's a really powerful position. And the debate that occurred was between kings and the Pope. When a bishop died or left his post for some reason, whose job was it to appoint a new one? Was it the Pope, as the head of the church, to appoint the bishop to a country's region? Or was it the king, because that land belonged to him? This controversy is called the lay investiture controversy, meaning that the king, a lay person, that's where that word is coming from. A lay person is someone who isn't in the church. So the king, a lay person, is going to invest a bishop into the position of the church. That was a really big deal. Partially because the church was a central part of everybody's life in Western Europe. The church had a really strict structure, like I referred to ahead of time. At the top, you had the Pope. The Pope was the leader of all Catholic clergy. Clergy is a word that means people who are part of the church in an official capacity. And depending on how you interpreted scripture, the Pope could also maybe be above all kings and emperors in Western Europe as well. So that was a really controversial position. Like I said, the bishops were the leader of Catholic clergy in a particular country. The bishop himself was the leader of Catholic clergy in a region. And then you have individual priests who are the head of a specific church or a parish. Now, there were other members of the clergy in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. These were largely people who secluded themselves from the world, sort of like what we're doing now. These people, however, lived in monasteries or in convents, and they were either monks if they were male or nuns if they were female. Monks retreated from the world and lived in a monastery. Nuns retreated from the world and lived in a convent. Now, to what degree they totally isolated themselves was really a matter of looking at individual branches of Catholicism. Like there are different sort of branches within it. And so some had very strict seclusion and some did not. But all of these people, monks and nuns, they did a lot of really hard work. They were usually very well educated, they were literate, but they were also totally self-sufficient within their monastery or within their convent, meaning that they had to raise their own food, they had to make their own clothing. They also were really good usually at medicine, and so as a result, the church became a place in medieval society that provided all sorts of spiritual, social, educational, and economic services. So obviously, the church provided spiritual guidance and the promise of salvation to Catholics, but it also provided social support. If you were poor or if you were an orphan, often the church would kind of raise you and support you. If you needed education at all, any schooling that occurred in the Middle Ages in Western Europe was done through the church. If you were a nobleman and you wanted your son to be educated, he would be educated at the church. If you were a woman and you were going to be educated, which was very rare, you might be sent to a convent school where you would be taught how to read and write, and you'd be studying religious matters. You'd also learn basic household arts like math. Math was usually an area that girls were instructed in, whereas boys weren't necessarily instructed in the same sort of way, because the assumption was that girls would be in charge of the household economy. So the church was really critical to people in the Middle Ages. And that is all I really need to talk to you about today. That is the bare bones of what you needed to know. So tomorrow you are going to need to cover a little bit more information for me on the Middle Ages in Western Europe, but it's not all that much. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is you need to go back to the blog, finish taking your notes if you haven't already, and then I'm going to ask you to take a quick 3-question learning check. There's a big red link right underneath these videos, and you need to click it and fill out the form, okay? All right, I will see you in office hours if you have any questions.